Hello, everybody. Welcome to Talk About Houses. I'm Todd.
I'm Juana.
Okay, today we're only going to talk about demographics because what appears that's going on is there's all these reasons that housing is going to crash. But one of them, the newest one, the baby boomers, and their impending deaths. They're just like basically almost all dead. Okay, nursing homes are full of them, and they'll die at such a high rate that the houses will just be empty and they'll flood the market and crash housing. We're actually going to dispel this. We're going to go through all the numbers of actually how many baby boomers there are, and the trends in everything. So now I have all the data. Juana hasn't seen the data, but Juana's going to give color commentary. So I'm going to do play-by-play.
Okay.
Juana's going to do color commentary.
I've already been doing color commentary over here that you haven't been noticing.
Oh, you've been making faces or something. Oh, I saw the face you made. Okay, so let's start off with it. First of all, full disclosure, we are Gen Xers. We are the generation immediately after the baby boomers.
Some of us are more X than others.
Yeah, basically. Okay, so what is the term baby boomer? Okay, now I'll read this. This is from Wikipedia. The term baby boom is often used to refer specifically the post-World War II, 1946 to 1964 baby boom in the United States and Europe. In the U.S., the number of annual births exceeded 2 per 100 women, or approximately 1% of the total population size. An estimated 78.3 million Americans were born during this period. So 78 million people born. At the time, it was the largest number of people born in what is considered a generation. Mm-hmm. Now, there was actually a book made called Generations that called them baby boomers and also coined the term Gen Xers. And it specifically said it was mid-1946 because it was basically had to wait for everyone to come back from World War II to mid-1964. So it was like June of 1964. So everyone born July 1964, basically up to like 1981 is a Gen Xer. Okay. So 78.3 million people during this period, okay? Now, when you look at those dates, the youngest boomers are basically 60, 59 or 60, okay? And you can, just first of all, Juana, an average 59-year-old is how much longer do you think they're going to live?
Well, if they've made it to 59, then they're probably going to make it somewhere around 80. So remember, the fact that life expectancy in the U.S. is somewhere in the low to mid 70s, that's from birth to death. But the longer you live, the longer your life expectancy, right? So somebody who's, for example, 75 years old, and if life expectancy is 74, you can't say, oh, well, they're dead. They just don't know it yet, right? They didn't get the memo. Obviously, their life expectancy is longer. So life expectancy that you see touted everywhere has to do with birth to death, not for actual people. So every year that you live, your life expectancy actually gets longer.
Right. So actually, we have very good numbers on that. So let's start with this. One of the ways to determine how long these people will actually be around, let's look at the generation before them.
Okay,
the generation before them was called the silent generation. This is also from Wikipedia. The silent generation, also known as the traditionalist generation, is the Western demographic cohort following the greatest generation and preceding the baby boomers. The generation is generally defined as people born from 1928 to 1945. Okay? Mm-hmm. Basically born during the Depression and during the war. By this definition and U.S. Census data, there were 23 million of them in 2019.
Okay.
Now remember, there weren't 76 million of them born. Okay, there were about 40-something million born, and half of them were still alive in 2019.
Right, so these people are like anywhere between 70 and 80 years old, and they're still alive in 2019.
No, they're into their 90s.
Right.
Because they 1928.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're basically 78 to like 90-something. Mm-hmm. Mid-90s, 95. Right. Okay? 23. So you have to then say 20 years from now, when these are pretty much all gone, there's maybe a few 100,000 of them left, there's probably going to be 20 or 30 million boomers left.
Right. So the boomers are actually going to probably live longer than these people, even though they probably ate worse than they did. But they've had access to better health care. They've had better nutrition throughout their lives. They've led healthier lives in other ways. So, we can expect that the longer the boomers live, the longer they will live still. So what I mean by that is that a boomer who is, let's say, 65 today is probably going to live to be 80. A boomer who is 70 today is probably going to live to maybe be 84 and that sort of thing.
We actually have numbers.
Oh, please go ahead.
Here we go. Most people know the average American lives to an age between 75 and 80. But Juana, what is that? That's called life expectancy, but what's that based on?
Well, so that considers people who died, in their 20s all the way up until, 90.
So when is your life expectancy 75 to 80?
So your life expectancy is 75 to 80 once you've reached that.
No, once you're born.
Well,
that's the birth. That's it from birth.
Right. So yeah, so life expectancy is from birth, but then the older you get, the more your life expectancy gets extended because you've missed all those opportunities to kick the bucket,
right.
Either from youthful misadventures or from disease or wars or accidents or that sort of thing. Because remember, the older you get, the less likely it is that you'll be killed in a war, in a youthful misadventure, in young people diseases and that sort of thing. So the older you get, the older you're going to get.
Okay, here we go. Life at age 60, an American man expect to reach 80 to a woman 85. So the youngest boomers, who are basically 60, are going to live 22 to 25 more years on average. So this idea that by 2030 half the boomers will be dead is completely false. They're not going to be.
Nope.
They're going to live probably 20 to 35 years on average, a lot of them, because once they've reached 60. Ready for this? Once they reach 80, it's 9.6 years. So if you make it to 80, half the people who make it to 80 live another 9.6 years. So here's a stat. Life expectancy age for the United States was 9.6 years. So it increased 7.27 years from 1975 and 9.6 years in 2020, growing an annual rate of 3.17%. Okay, so now that we have basically covered, the boomers are not all going to die anytime soon.
Well,
and I mean in the next 5 years, 10 years.
There are poisonous mushrooms out there.
Okay, now let's talk about because Juana, you've done a lot of probate.
Yes.
So let's talk about what happens when somebody passes away. Okay, somebody passes away. What's the first order of event? Who gets the house first?
Okay, so it depends on what arrangements they've made beforehand, right? So if the property is in a trust, then that is much more straightforward. The heirs then go ahead and deal with the asset however they see fit or however the trust prescribes. Okay. If the asset is not in a trust, then it goes to probate. Regardless, what happens at that point, whether it's probate once it's resolved or a trust, the heirs need to decide how to deal with this asset. When you're dealing with multiple assets, with multiple heirs, if they're amicable, okay, then a lot of times the asset is kept. So that means that the house is not sold on the open market. It may be sold within the heirs. So let me give you an example. Let's say that we have two sisters, right?
Right.
House was in a trust. Dad dies. Dad's the last of the parents. The two sisters are now the people who inherit from the trust. One sister says, I want to sell the house. The other sister says, I want the house. So what happens is the sister who wants the house then actually buys the sister's share that wants the house, so gives her half the money for the worth of the house, and now she owns the house free and clear. So that is not uncommon. That's actually pretty common. The other thing that's very common is for the sisters then to keep the property and rent it out. That's pretty common. What is not as common is for the house to be outright sold. That is pretty uncommon. So you're thinking, why would that be uncommon? Well, the reason that's uncommon is because, to Todd's point, people are living longer. So what happens when a parent that's in their 80s dies? Well, how old are their children? Their children are in their 50s or 60s. So now these are not children that need the cash. So these are children that are looking for ways to also build their estate and leave a legacy for their children. So there's no reason for them to want the cash. So that's a large part of the reason why these houses are not sold. And then as you go down the line, I've seen it to where grandchildren end up with the house, or the house gets rented out, whatever. But very seldom is the house actually sold. When you have somebody who is younger who passes away, that's when the house is more likely to be sold. But of course, those are very few people, and those are not the people that we're talking about. These are not the baby boomers. Right. These would be the Gen Xers or a younger generation. And the reason that those houses are sold is actually to clear up debts, because those houses generally have mortgages, so those mortgages have to be paid, and maybe they have younger children that need to be cared for, and that sort of thing. So yet when younger generations die, those houses are much more likely to be sold off than older generations.
Okay. What about also surviving spouse?
Okay,
so boomer dies, they have a surviving spouse.
Right, so surviving spouses tend to want to stay in the house. So we know lots of people who are in the house that they raised their children and then the grandchildren in, and maybe this house is way too big for them. Maybe they're in their 70s or 80s and they're still living in that 5,000-6,000 square foot house that they raised their families in, but this is where all their memories are. So long as the surviving spouse is still in sufficient health to be able to live in the house, they do. And again, there's no reason for them to sell the house. The house is paid off. They're comfortable there. They're happy there. That's the environment that they're accustomed to. So it's not uncommon to see people in their 80s or 90s who actually end up passing away in the house that they've lived in for the past 30, 40, 50 years. That's very common.
Okay, here's another reason why the baby boomers are not just going to leave a ton of like all these houses are just going to flood the market. Mm-hmm. Ready for this? They're not the largest generation. Matter of fact, they're not even the second largest generation. They're the third largest generation. You ready for this? Look at this chart. There are more millennials and more Gen Zs than there are baby boomers. Mm-hmm. Why? Because 10 million of the boomers have died already.
Well, not only that, but remember the boomers themselves had babies, and they more than replaced themselves.
Yeah, they more than replaced themselves. So remember, where all these millennials, Gen Zs, and Generation Alpha, for the most part, came from the greatest generation, the silent generation, and the boomers. Mm-hmm. They made those people. Mm-hmm. So you're not even, and when you look at this chart, and you're like, well, the baby boomers, the millennials and the Gen Zs that don't have houses or renting or whatever, well, they need a place. So they're going to inherit the houses, and they're either going to use them as a rental or they're going to live in them for the most part. And yes, right, some of them will get sold, but you can see here, like, okay, the greatest generation all the way to the left, they've almost all died off. So what 5 or 10 year period that they all died was the housing crash because they died. And the truth is it wasn't, because the whole time these people were dying, the United States population was growing, right? And then when the silent generation were mostly dying, mm-hmm, the population was still growing. Mm-hmm. Well, Juana, what do you think is going to happen over the next 30 years, plus maybe 35 years? It takes the whole baby boomers generation to die. Mm-hmm. Think the population will go up or down?
The U.S. population is projected to keep increasing all the way to something like 2070.
Okay, Juana, how's that possible? With 68 million people are going to die in the next 35 years. How's the population going to increase? Where are they going to come from?
People who don't have internet and have nothing else to do.
Okay. So that brings us to this chart. This is the population projection. The fact that a cohort of people are going to die where's the dip in this chart showing the decrease in population and all the extra homes that are like nobody needs? And the bottom line is they're not there.
Right.
Because even for every time a person dies, two people, someone's born and then somebody immigrates.
Right.
So you lose a grandparent, you have a child, and then someone comes over here from another country.
Okay, but so here's the thing. During the span that the baby boomers will drop off the cliff, so to speak, there are lots of children being born to different generations. So that's something to keep in mind. So it's not just one generation having children, it's multiple generations having children, because the childbearing has been extended, right? Because now women are having children all the way into their 40s and maybe even early 50s through all kinds of different fertility methods. So this whole situation of people having children, it's lasting much longer. Plus, to your point, we have immigration. And when we have immigration, keep in mind that immigrants tend to have more children than American-born people. And there are a whole host of cultural reasons for that. But the bottom line is that immigrants tend to have more children. So for every, for example, 10 immigrants that come in, they're not going to have another 10 children, on top. They're probably going to have somewhere between 20 and 30. So that's an interesting thing to kind of keep in mind. They tend to have more children than Americans do, because we're tending to have something like 1.3 kids, and they tend to have more like 2 point some kids. So that's something to keep in mind.
Okay.
So that all builds towards this continued population growth. Now, when we get to 2070, I think part of that is that I don't know how, the farther out you go, the less accurate I think these statistics are, because
because we don't know.
Well, we don't know, and part of the reason why we don't know is because social norms change, right? And so we'll see what happens at that point. But this certainly gives us a pretty big runway, because we're in 2023. So, we're looking at roughly 50 years in the future. That's a long time. And certainly the climate change people think that the world ended a couple years ago. So we're in bonus time now.
They'll probably just grow them in a lab. Hey, we need more people. Let's grow them in a lab, right? Like Logan's. I don't remember. Was Logan's Run? They did that, didn't they?
They did.
They didn't have naturally, right? They grew them in a lab.
That and Matrix and lots of places they grew them in a lab.
Oh, they grew them in a lab. Or we'll just ramp up. Somebody will say, hey, look, our population started to decline. Let's just bring some more people in. Let's open up immigration. Let's have, issue more visas. Japan has population decline. There's some European countries with population decline. With all that being said, the bottom line is no one knows what's going to happen in 50 years, but we do know this. The boomers are not going to create a housing crash with all these homes on the market from dying boomers that they don't go anywhere, because the truth is, every single house, we have never, ever had a house where it didn't have an heir. Look, if you don't have kids, you go, who should we leave our house to when we die? We never had kids. And you go, well, what about your favorite niece who comes and visits us for Christmas every year?
But
let's leave it to her then. My brother's daughter.
Right. Well, sometimes people just leave things to their friends. I've seen that, where people have left their home to their friends.
We've totally seen that.
They've left their 401k to their friends. This is not like there's no one to leave it to. Sometimes they leave it to a charitable organization.
Yep.
Okay? They're all... And let's face it, if there's nothing, then it goes to the state. Okay? So somewhere down the line, somebody gets it, right? Obviously, if it goes to the state's going to go ahead and liquidate it. But, and it's probably the same thing with a charitable organization, depending on the organization, unless they decide to use it for some other purpose. But the idea that every house belonging to someone who has died will be liquidated is unreasonable. Our position is that a great number of these houses are certainly not liquidated right away. They are kept for whatever reason, either as investments or for family to live in, or for whatever reason. So these homes do not come on the market instantly, because if they did, the vultures, i.e. realtors, would jump on everybody that has died and and want to list the house. And while they do send out marketing materials, they're certainly not beating down the door because they know that a lot of these homes will not be sold.
Right. So I think, we know the numbers. This false premise that the boomers will finally crash the housing market is just as characterization of what will actually happen is the next recession that will happen in December. The foreclosure should hit by probably February because the recession hits, they lose their job, they miss a mortgage payment, the foreclosure happens all within 2 months, and they're on the street, they have nowhere to live, so they're forced to now live in a rental because all this happens so incredibly fast. And clearly there'll be enough houses that millions will hit the market, home prices will collapse, and I'll be able to rush in and buy a house for pennies on the dollar in a very narrow window, 3 or 4 houses for a couple $100, and then immediately home prices will go back up to 400,000, and I'll be good because I just bought a bunch of houses for $20. That's like the panacea that the crash bros and doomers have. This is my estimation. The crash bros and the doomers don't own houses.
I don't agree with that.
And if they do, why haven't they sold? If they're so sure.
I think they own houses. I think that they put out entertainment.
Okay.
I think that they make a good bit of money from the videos that they put out. I think they have a solid audience that consumes their content, and they make a lot of money from it, and they just provide their audience what they're looking for. They're no different than reality TV shows. They're not real. They're just a show.
They've been wrong for 4 years. They predicted 4 housing crashes in the last 4 years that 0 of them came true.
Right, but their audience is still there, and their audience still wants to consume their content.
Right.
So clearly being right has nothing to do with audience loyalty.
Yeah, the 20 or 30,000 a month they're making YouTube revenue, they probably don't even care.
No, they don't. That's my point. It's entertainment.
Yeah.
And it does not negatively impact the size of their audience.
Go back and watch the 2020 videos. The 4 million houses are going to hit the housing market by next year. And then look what home prices did in 2021. You know who I feel bad for? First of all, we've never said now's a good time to buy. So if you already put that in the comments, you probably didn't watch the video because I see that all the time. Okay. I feel bad for the people who were like getting ready to buy and they're like, okay, now it's time for me to buy. I've got savings, the interest rates are really low, home prices are pretty reasonable. And then you watch a crash video and went, oh, I'm glad I saw this video. Man, it's 2020. We're kind of getting out of the pandemic. The house I really wanted to buy is $280. I'm just going to wait. Home prices crash 30, 40% the next year. I'll buy it next year as a foreclosure. Next year comes around, the house is $350. Mm-hmm. They waited another year, the house is $380, and interest rates are 6.5%. And they're now they're pissed that they can't buy. And now they're feeding on the housing crash videos, hoping that not only will home prices crash, but interest rates will also go down so that, yeah.
Well, we now had a client that we managed a property for, and the tenant sold his house for, I think, something around $780 or something like that. And then he moved into the rental, and he was paying about a little over $4,000 a month in rent. He ended up paying over $60,000 in rent, all told. And by the time he moved out, his house the house that he sold for about $780 was worth about $900. Plus, he had spent about $60,000 in rent.
And he specifically cited the housing crash.
Right.
He didn't need to move for a year, but he was going to sell it now before the crash and get his money out. And then, so basically, he gave up probably $200,000 of equity, and he had to move.
Right.
And he ended up moving anyway because he only sold it temporary. He only sold it and rented for a year because he was going to move anyway.
Right. So, by the time you calculate what he lost in appreciation and what he lost by paying rent, yeah, it's pretty close to $200,000. So, just an interesting thing. Obviously, it could have gone the other way, and he could have been absolutely brilliant. There was no way to tell it at the time, but I'm just giving you an example of what happens when people sell out of fear rather than it's the right time for them to sell.
Right. And if you do need to sell anywhere in the country, you can just reach out to us. I'll put our contact info in the description of the video. You can just reach out and say, hey, I need to sell, and I'm in this market. And we'll either, if you're in our market, we'll help you with it. And if you're not in our market, we can find you somebody.
Absolutely. So remember, we are practitioners, so please consider using our services. Remember to like the video, subscribe, hit the notification bell, share the video, and leave us brilliant comments about real estate. We love your real estate comments. We'll see you on the next video. Bye.
Bye.